Is Uzuki a bad villain? Over the course of Sakamoto Days' 170 plus chapters, readers have seen Uzuki go from this mysterious, menacing, almost ghostly villain with a lot of potential to upend the story, to someone with a mental health problem, childhood trauma, and a sympathetic backstory. This drastic contrast between the character that was introduced back in chapter 15 and the character that we see now has led many readers to say that Uzuki is a bad villain carried by an unexplained, plot armor heavy ability and has ultimately lost all the presence he once had over the story. So today I figured I'd take a deep dive into Uzuki's character arc to really determine if he is a bad villain. Before I give a verdict on Uzuki's villain status, I want to take a run through Uzuki's journey as a villain. In chapter 15, it's revealed that over 30 groups related to the JAA have been wiped out, and over 100 pro-assassins have been flat out killed. The guy behind these killings is of course Uzuki, and in the same chapter, we get our first glimpse of him as he paints an X on the wall with the blood of the people he just killed, all while reading a children's book on drawing and saying that the balance of the X is slightly off. The next time we see him is in Kashima's flashbacks, where he's shown condoning Kashima's murders because it's ultimately in the pursuit of a greater justice. One thing I'd like to note is that in all of these showings so far, Uzuki's face is never actually shown, and we only see part of his body. There is a quick shot of his face when Shishiba uncovers some camera footage, but that isn't super high quality. Our next showing of Uzuki is one people love citing when concerning Uzuki's aura, and it's when Shin is running through the lab saying that he hears two voices. Despite this, Shin only sees one person whose bloodlust is so intense that he instantly gets a vision of him and his adoptive dad being slashed to pieces. Uzuki is the one radiating this much bloodlust, and he suddenly appears behind Shin, telling him to give his best to Sakamoto before disappearing in an instant. There's a few mentions of Uzuki during the serial killer arc since he's the one who set up the whole serial killer roaming around Japan thing, but his first major appearance is in the JAA Invasion arc. Here we see him and Gaku pulling up to the JAA base, equating it to showing up to school with a new haircut. You don't see a lot of Uzuki action in the beginning, but the fact that someone like Gaku, who's casually taking out all of the JAA defenses without breaking a sweat, is still subordinate to him and literally calls him boss, implies that Uzuki is superior to him in strength and further sets him up to be a major threat. This is finally confirmed as Sakamoto pulls up to confront Uzuki, in which we get some pretty cold moments. Uzuki is pretty casual as he talks to Sakamoto, commenting on how he's gained weight and how he doesn't remember Sakamoto being so chatty, before casually stabbing him in the chest, and Sakamoto takes too long to realize that he's been stabbed, and by the time he can swing in response, Uzuki is already gone and proceeds to casually cut off a part's arm. We get some more small talk from Uzuki as he talks about how their encounter is kind of like a school reunion, while prodding Sakamoto, asking him if he wants to kill him again. And despite Sakamoto seemingly being locked in and dashing at Uzuki, Uzuki is able to effortlessly dodge Sakamoto's attack as he calls him naive and annoying, before slamming Sakamoto with his whip chain. Shin tries to help, only for Uzuki to appear behind him, ready to break his neck as Sakamoto dashes in to save him. Uzuki keeps trying to bring back Sakamoto's bloodlust as he tells him to go in with an intent to kill, before finally deciding to threaten his daughter, which actually prompts Sakamoto to get angry. Despite Sakamoto's bloodlust being intense enough to make Uzuki feel like he just got stabbed several times, Uzuki still has a smile on his face as Sakamoto gets ready to attack him again, and Uzuki still manages to dodge Sakamoto's punch while welcoming back the old Sakamoto. Unfortunately, their fight is interrupted as Gaku comes flying through a window complaining about Takamura, before Takamura himself pulls up. Takamura does Takamura things, casually bodying Uda and Gaku at the same time, before Uzuki decides to call off the operation. Gaku does tell Uzuki to show off his skills, but Uzuki declines and starts running away. Sakamoto pulls up to try and stop them, only for Uzuki to dodge his attack and counter, before Uda blows himself up to stop Takamura. After the explosion, Uzuki is seen standing over Sakamoto, saying something incomprehensible, before Gaku tells him it's time to go and the two leave. We finally get a glimpse into the villain life as Uzuki, Kashima, and Gaku talk after the JAA invasion. With the invasion ultimately being unsuccessful and Uzuki clearly showing apprehension toward Takamura and Sakamoto, he decides to increase their numbers by recruiting some new blood. This is fully shown as Gaku invades the JCC test as Shinaya, and while Uzuki doesn't do much aside from stand around and talk, he still maintains a certain level of danger to the story with the way he talks. The main point of the whole plan was to kidnap Mafuyu and Toramaru, and here Uzuki's group is shown to include some new and interesting people, including the likes of Kanaguri, Carolina Reaper, and Club Gem. Uzuki once again repeats the whole sacred justice motif as he explains that it's the whole reason he wants to destroy the JAA. And from here, you get a few small scenes with Uzuki, the most important of which being when Mafuyu and Toramaru decide to sneak around their hideout and end up seeing Uzuki mumbling to himself in a room. Kashima pulls up and threatens to blow them up, and Uzuki exits to talk to the two of them, once again acting nonchalant. There's a few more scenes of Uzuki, but you get the point. Up until chapter 104, Uzuki is portrayed as this relaxed, mysterious guy with no real objection to killing and an immense amount of strength to back him up. But with chapter 104, that all changes. As Amane's grandpa recreates Uzuki's student record and recalls a couple memories about him, it's revealed that Uzuki didn't used to be the super assassin terrorist people now know him as. Instead, during his student years, he used to be meek, reluctant to kill, and ultimately unremarkable. This is where the split personality aspect of Uzuki is revealed, which explains why Shin heard two voices at the Okutabi lab despite only seeing one person. It also sets up the potential for Uzuki to be the victim rather than the villain of the story, but I'll go more in depth with that later. One of the biggest shifts for Uzuki's character is seen with the flashback arc, where readers get to see firsthand what Uzuki used to be like. As Amane's grandpa stated, Uzuki is meek and reluctant to kill. He flat out stops Rion from killing people in the department store because he has a sense of morality, and as the flashback goes on, it's revealed that Uzuki is more of a puppet than an evil mastermind. One of his few friends, Gaku, is being held hostage at the orphanage, and Uzuki pretty much has no choice but to listen to Asaki as he's instructed to infiltrate the JCC to eventually get rid of JAA leadership. Given that this arc occurs directly after the mini-arc with Yotsumura, it further adds context to the whole chairman of the JAA situation and reveals that Asaki was likely behind not only the chairman's murder, but the framing of Yotsumura as well. As a whole, the flashback really just removes a lot of Uzuki's villainous aura by painting him as someone who was manipulated and blackmailed into committing crimes, and while there is still a disconnect between the Uzuki of the present who is seemingly fine with killing, and the Uzuki of the past who had a deep hatred of it, the multiple personality aspect of him helps to explain it. The final nail in the coffin for Uzuki's aura comes with the reveal of the Rion personality in chapter 129. This reveal, well, it does raise a lot of questions on the already open-ended plot of Rion and Uzuki's relationship, and is an interesting twist. It also heavily reduces Uzuki's threat to the story for most people. Not only was Uzuki's bloodlust during the Okutabi lab arc revealed to be a byproduct of the Rion personality and not himself, but the fact that he spent enough time with Rion to literally integrate her personality into his mind signaled to a lot of readers that Uzuki really isn't the villain. He's simply not threatening enough, with a sympathetic backstory showing that he really doesn't want harm, and the Rion personality further cementing that. However, with Uzuki recently gaining the Takamura personality, thereby making him top 1 in the series and a major threat to both the JAA and Sakamoto's gang, it does leave the door open for Uzuki to fully take his place as the series' main villain. So I've done a lot of yapping, but I haven't actually answered the question I posed at the beginning of the video. Is Uzuki a bad villain? In a vacuum, I would say yes. He slowly loses all the threatening aura he had at the beginning of the series, going from someone you're legitimately scared of to someone who just has unresolved trauma. And while Suzuki has attempted to restore some of Uzuki's old aura, it comes at the cost of him as a character. Because the threat comes from the Takamura personality and not Uzuki himself, it still feels like Uzuki isn't the threat. Rather, the threat is the byproduct of his mental health issues. But I did say in a vacuum, so let me explain. Well, yes, I think that if we take a look at Uzuki as the sole villain of the series, he falls flat. With proper context, I don't think that's the case. With the introduction of Asaki in the flashback arc, and as more and more details come to light about what he did at the orphanage, how he played a hand in the death of the previous chairman, and the general corruption of the JAA as a whole, I think it's entirely possible that Asaki becomes the actual main villain of the series. As I said earlier, Uzuki has been turned from the villain into the victim, and I believe that's mainly to set up the revelation that Asaki is more responsible for the evil in the assassin world, and getting rid of him would actually lead to the sacred justice Uzuki likes to talk about. It would ultimately resolve a lot of the conflicts going on. With this context, I think it would be wrong to label Uzuki as a bad villain, because he isn't the villain at all. At this point in the story, he would be more like a misunderstood anti-hero. So overall, I understand why people would label Uzuki as a bad villain or a fraud. If he does end up being the series' main villain, I think Suzuki is going to have to do a lot of work with him to win back readers' fear and respect for him, otherwise he's just going to be lackluster. But with the way things are heading in the main story, I think Asaki is really the main villain, Uzuki is just a victim of childhood trauma.